Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's first loss of the Big Ten season, 70-64 to the USC Trojans at the Galen Center, ending Michigan State's 13-game winning streak. Before we begin, a quick word of thanks to Joe and BT on Substack, who became a monthly subscriber. So thanks a lot, Joe. We appreciate it. Rod, we had quite the adventure getting to the game. The flight was great, but that's kind of where things broke down. We got stuck in the car rental agency for about 3.5 hours or so. Didn't get into our place around 3:30 in the morning Pacific time, which caused us to be really late to the pep rally. So apologize if people were there looking to find us. I know we met someone there, but kept us dragging a little bit, which is kind of the way Michigan State looked at the start of the game. And huge, massive presence for Michigan State, the building. But despite that, USC got out to a quick 15-point lead behind Desmond Claude, hitting a bunch of shots. Michigan State turned the ball over a bunch. USC got some timely offensive rebounds early, and Michigan State found themselves down 15 and kind of just playing catch up with the rest of the game. So kind of what they needed to do to get the upset over Michigan State. And Michigan State struggled to attack the zone. They couldn't clean up defensive possessions off their boards, and they couldn't get much going in transition, just making things really challenging for them for today.
Yeah, I guess let's first talk about the atmosphere because it really was incredible. I'm assuming it came through on television. It had to have because in the building it was nuts. You mentioned we went to a pep rally beforehand, and the way USC is set up for people who haven't been there, the Galen Center where they play their games is, I believe, right across. I think it's Figueroa from the USC campus. So it's essentially part of the campus. It's all there. And we were the pep rally thing was at a building into campus a little bit. So we got to see kind of the lay of the land. And it was incredible, the number of Michigan State people there. Just, I mean, awe-inspiring is probably a little strong, but pretty close. When you think about a road game, I've never seen anything like this. Never. I mean, people talk about the way Lions fans traveled the last couple seasons, and that's impressive too. Not like this. This was, you want to talk about Breslin West and a takeover of a building. It really was. I mean, it looked to me, we talked about it afterward. I guess we figured maybe 75, 80% full.
Yeah.
I mean, I think saying half Michigan State fans is generous to USC. It really felt like that there were more than half of the building was Michigan State fans, and they tried. Unfortunately, Michigan State did not give the fans a whole lot to get excited about in this game. It was disappointing, and not that they took a loss. We knew that was inevitable. This team was not going to go 20-0 in the league, and this almost certainly is not the last loss they're going to take. But I think the disappointing part was the way in which, and it's not even, I should back up half a step. It's not even that they lost to USC. USC is not a great team. I still think the odds are firmly stacked against them to be a tournament team, but they're 5-5 in the league. They beat Illinois on the road. They've won some good games. And, so they didn't go out and lose to Minnesota, guys down the road. They, or Washington. That's a credible team. And so it's not embarrassing that you lost to them on their home court. It's more the way that Michigan State lost that, God, even USC fans, I'm assuming, feel pretty good about the way they played. And I would think Eric Musselman would feel good about it. But Michigan State should have won that game. I mean, if they do just most of the things that they've done well all year, they win that game pretty easily, you know? And the fact that they didn't do it is what got them in trouble. And it happened, as you said, almost from the opening tap when USC was able to get a flurry of offensive rebounds. Desmond Claude was able to get downhill. These were all things we said you can't do. And then as it unfolded, you look at the way Michigan State really didn't do a whole hell of a lot in transition. I think they had 9 fast break points, which is half of what they're averaging. Give USC credit for that because I do think this. I think Michigan State tried to push the ball. It wasn't that, Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman were playing AJ Hoggard out there. They were trying to push. It just wasn't there. Hats off to USC. They were much more disciplined than I ever thought they could be in that regard. But regardless, Michigan State did not get much done in transition. They had maybe, I mean, we haven't checked it, but maybe their worst free throw performance of the season has to be right there. Did an okay job getting to the line, just not a very good job converting. And conversely, USC was really good. And then the defensive rebounding. which has been an occasional problem, more so recently, unfortunately. And I think it was both early in the game and late in the game. It was a big, big problem because, man, late in the game, they had chances. They would get a missed shot and they just couldn't end the possession.
Yeah. Well, it was a frustrating game to watch, obviously, because they just got down so much early that just they were playing catch up, and I think it took them out of their game quite a bit. They were surprised, I think that, and they were really, I think they were really challenged with that zone. I think they had trouble attacking it. I felt there were plenty of times they got sort of partway into the lane and then just didn't quite complete it, and I'm not quite sure why. If they just felt like they're getting walled off.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about USC, which I honestly had not noticed as much, I think they've done some of it, but they did a lot of it in this game, is they were sometimes changing between zone and man in the midst of a possession. They did some of that. Where they would start out a possession, and that's an old Rick Pitino move when he was at Louisville. He would do some of that. Very difficult to do. I'm not sure that it's a long-term strategy for success, but boy, they played it really well in this game. And you're right. MSU had real difficulty getting downhill. And when they would get there at times, it felt like they were just running into something of a wall. There weren't those kind of easy opportunities we're used to seeing. And that meant that they weren't getting points in the paint the way we normally expect them to. They did a decent job getting to the foul line, but not maybe quite the method that we're used to seeing it. And so all of that really hurt. And again, credit to USC for, I think, doing a far better job defensively than I ever thought they could do. This has been a bad defensive team. I mean, they were right on the line of falling out of the top 100. We talk about all the time, if you're a Big Ten team, you're not in the top 100 in defense, you're bad. You're really bad. They were really good today. I mean, I don't think that was just, man, Michigan State was just missing easy looks all day long. No, I'm going to give USC at least some credit for what we saw. I think they did a really good job of walling up, denying dribble penetration. And then even when that penetration happened, they did a good job of cutting off shot opportunities. I think the one thing you and I did talk about, though, in regard to offense at the rim that we didn't see happen is I really thought Michigan State did not do as much as they should have tried to do in terms of getting the ball to the bigs. And you noted it's true. The first two possessions they went inside, which is frequently what they do to open games, and they both were turnovers. And that just kind of set the tone. They didn't go back to it very often. I think in retrospect, maybe a mistake because USC has no rim protection and just not much size, period. And I think if Michigan State had been a little more pointed, and it's not normally something we want to see, right? A steady diet of post play. Like those guys can make plays occasionally, but that's not, we don't want to see possession after possession of that. But I think maybe a little more of it in this game might have been advisable the way things unfolded. But I'm Tuesday morning quarterbacking. It's easy for me to say now. But I do watching that game, that's what I came away with is boy, there might have been some more opportunities there if we'd gone to that well a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, and as you can tell, we're obviously recording this in person in our remote studios. The one thing I would say though, with the driving door inside, Carr effectively in the first half was doing a pretty good job. He was able to get in the lane and to actually have some decent attempts. He had a couple turnovers where he stepped out of bounds, maybe 2 or 3 times on layup attempts, which kind of hurt a little bit. But really, we thought they'd get a lot done on the offensive boards, and they really weren't able to get a whole lot there. They got, when you look at the numbers in the end, it looks not terrible. But I think ultimately it wasn't enough to make a difference for them to get enough offense generated. Yeah. So moving on then we'll talk about the player to keep in the gutter, brought to you by the Brothers Just Gutters. Rod and I are out here in sunny California. Not much rain out here, but I know you guys have all that rain. I was talking to my wife today, and it was 0 degrees where she was out. So I almost feel sorry for her. But I know she doesn't listen to these post-game shows, so we should be good as far as that goes. So she won't know that I don't feel sorry for it at all. But if you want to make sure your gutters are clear, make sure you have the snow when it melts, it goes down to the right place and stays away from your foundation, contact the Brothers Just Gutters. That's all they do. They just take care of gutters, whether it's replacing, repairing it, just cleaning them out, putting leaf guards on, whatever you need done, the brothers can do that for you. Head on over to our support page at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. And there you can get the necessary links in order to get them to come out to your place. And since you're listening to the show, 10% off if you mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. So the player that they had to Michigan State to keep in the gutter was Desmond Claude, who the best time he was in the gutter is when he had his ankle injury and he was out for a little while in the first half. That's when Michigan State cut that lead significantly from 15 points down to, I don't know, like 4 maybe or something like that. He ended up with 6 for 13 from the field, 1 for 4 from the three, 6 for 9 at the line, 19 points, 6 rebounds, none of them offensive, 3 assists, 4 turnovers, no steals, no block. So he definitely was, especially in the first half, he was very effective. I think the second half he didn't do quite as much, but he definitely was orchestrating things, and that was a large reason why they won this game.
I would largely agree with that. I think the one thing I would add is that it's easy to say, well, he wasn't as good in the second half, and that Jeremy Fears in particular did a little better job, Jaden Akins too, in guarding him. And I do think that was true. But I think my take on this is that he became such a center of gravity for what they did that in the second half, even if it wasn't a play that he had an assist on, Michigan State, you could see it, and I'm sure it was evident on the television as well. They were so concerned about him because of the damage he did early. And I think that was probably, it's tough to quantify this stuff, but you could say, well, is that responsible? The amount of attention that, say, a help side defender is paying to him, does that mean that they're a half second late closing on a shooter? I think there was some of that. I really do. I think he played a really good game. I mean, his stats are good. They're not great. The efficiency is a little bit wanting in some areas, but man, I just think he helped them certainly set a tone right out of the chute. And with his first half play, especially like the first 8 minutes or so, he was great. And I think in the second half, even if he wasn't racking up counting stat production, I just think his presence meant a lot to that team because he forced, and he just has so much of the ball. I mean, every possession. And I still maintain he's not a point guard. I mean, what do you, 3 assists, 4 turnovers in this game? That's kind of par for the course. He's not a point guard, but that doesn't mean he can't be an effective player. And I've mentioned and I've kind of mocked USC at times this year for being one of the ugliest offenses I've ever seen. And God's honest truth, if this is the only time you saw them was today, you wouldn't know that. But they can be incredibly ugly to watch. What helped them today is, of course, let's be honest about it. They got some breaks. I mean, I think they had 3 triples with the shot clock running out. They had plays late where, Claude got stripped and the ball just fell to Cohen. I think it was 2 possessions in a row for layups. That's just good fortune. And I'm not saying that to denigrate them. Part of winning is being lucky. But he's just a difference maker. There's no way around it. Desmond Claude, very good player. Michigan State did not keep him in the gutter today, in my view, and that's that.
Yep, I absolutely agree. So who cleans glass best? Brought to you by the Squeeze Squad of Grand Rapids, who definitely cleans your glass best. If you need your windows cleaned or your house, they can come on out and take care of that. Again, ways to get a hold of them are on the support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can get 15% off, like you mentioned, Final Four when you get your estimate. If you're in the greater Grand Rapids area, they can take care of your exterior windows, the interior of the windows, the windowsill screens, whatever needs to be done. They can also do some interior painting too. So if you need any help seeing out your windows more clearly, contact the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids who clean glass best. So who cleans glass best? I was up 9, or I was down 9-7, and now once again you're back on the winning streak. All you needed was Kohler. Kohler had 8, which was more than by 2 combined, which is Kohler and Cooper and Carr, who had 5. Zapala with 1 again. He's not been great rebounding, and Kohler was 7 defensive rebounds, so he definitely was leading the way. When you could definitely tell when he was not on the floor, they really struggled defensively rebound. That was now. I say that yet early in the game. Of course, Kohler was on the floor, and they were still getting offensive rebounds, being USC. But late in the game, Kohler wasn't playing, I don't think, and they really had trouble cleaning up possessions. And so I don't. It's interesting. I once wonder if they had the Cooper out there, I think, to help with defensively on the switches, and then they eventually went away from that. But I don't know, maybe because what killed them at the end, I feel like, was defensive rebounding. Although you could also say they were down 7 or whatever, and so it's a thin chance of winning anyway at that point. And whether that's the different, maybe you lose something by having Kohler versus Cooper.
But I will say this: there was that possession with. I want to say it started with about 5:40 or so. It might have even been a little over 6 minutes to go, where USC was up five, and they got two offensive rebounds after long possessions, and then eventually I think got fouled and cashed in with two free throws. But meantime, they ran more than a minute off the clock and took it from 5 to 7. That was one of the decisive moments in the game. Now, you're right. Everything that comes before that gets you to that point. So it can be misleading to focus on any one segment and say that was it. But that was it. Well, it was one of them. It was one of them. There was another one we could talk about where it was Michigan State's offense that was to blame. But yeah, I'm glad to take the victory, but this was not a game where Michigan State covered itself in glory with its rebounding effort. And again, it's really impossible to justify or excuse because USC is a bad rebounding team. By this point in the season, you are what you are. They're a bad rebounding team. No excuse for it, and it happened. So, and it's been happening too often. I mean, they cleaned it up in the I think in the second half of the Rutgers game, and then in the last game they played before Minnesota before coming out here. But the problem was back again, and it can't happen. You and I were talking about this on the drive back, and it's partially related to the rebounding issue. I just thought Michigan State got caught with, and I'm not one to obsess over lineups, but I did think they got caught with some weird combinations out there late. And I think I understand why. I think part of it was motivated by the fact that Izzo was infuriated by the fact they couldn't get a defensive rebound when they needed one. And so he would make a switch to get a little better rebounding group in. But conversely, they'd be left with a group that maybe had one shooter on the floor and they were down. It wasn't like they were protecting a lead, they were down. So, yeah, you might get a defensive rebound now, but you're probably not going to have that shooter you need to help you offensively. And that's part of what made this such a frustrating game is this team has been so good at finding the right combination for that particular game, and it's not ever the same. It varies from opponent to opponent and from night to night, depending upon how guys on Michigan State's team are playing. They just couldn't come up with it in this game. And, there's another thing we were talking about, kind of off the subject a little bit, but this is late leads me to it, is I do feel like this is the first time where maybe you could fairly say Michigan State got hurt by the fact that it doesn't have an alpha. It doesn't have a guy that push comes to shove, we're riding on that guy's back. Because this was a game that if you had that guy, maybe you get it done. A guy who could take over in the last 5, 6 minutes and just go get buckets every time down, 4, 5, 6 possessions in a row. They don't have that. And it might have been helpful to have that in this particular game. Again, I'm not saying, oh, the whole thing's overboard now, but you get my point. I do think that this was one where you could clearly see what the absence of that kind of figure can do in a given situation.
Yeah, this is I felt like Izzo, and it's certainly the end. You replace rebounding, then you lose some. There is one of those things where you plug up one hole in the dike, and you end up in two others. You don't have enough fingers to cover all the holes, and so he was sort of stuck with whatever sort of combination he was trying to fix. He caused a problem somewhere else where they just were lacking, and so that brings us to the 5 keys of the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you want to wear some great Spartan apparel, head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. 20% off as a listener to the show. If you just go and type in Final Four when you get your order at the checkout. They have all kinds of things, whether it's hoodies, t-shirts, hats. I've got a hoodie right now, super comfortable, very holds up very well with washes. And again, you can't go wrong. All kinds of things there. It's a huge selection, so check it out at nudgeprinting.com. So the first key of the game was the time zone. Clearly, it affected us. We were getting in. We came in, of course, on the day of the game. Well, essentially we did. We arrived. I guess we arrived. We arrived the day before, but didn't actually get our car until 3 in the morning or something. And which here's just a little thing. There was a woman there who's very upset. She had a bad experience. Her car broke down. She ends up having to come back, and they got this whole huge problem getting the cars out. She was there hours, I think, before we even got there. I think a couple hours. And so she started complaining to every single manager multiple times. She's doing a TikTok video or something or Instagram, explaining her exploits and having her friends. Anyway, causing a big scene. So eventually, we had a car. We got a car. We got out, and as we were trying to get out, that car was actually checked out by someone else. It was just about. It was almost like a comedy of errors. How everything was wrong. So we had to bring our Kia back, and then since we were so nice and she was not, we got a Mercedes-Benz upgrade. So that worked out pretty well. But all that's to say is the time zone I don't think affected Michigan State, but uh, it hasn't had didn't help them maybe.
Well, I'll speak to your first bit there about us real briefly. Believe it or not, some of you may realize that I perhaps have a reputation as I'll put a kind spin on it and say not suffering fools gladly, but to be combative, confrontational. Um, it might be interesting to note that yes, we got upgraded to a significantly better car as a result of the way I conducted myself in an extremely stressful, and I am telling you, you cannot imagine the amount of anger floating around that room, not from us, but from the people there as a whole. It was brutal. So I will take a little bit, and Eric too. Neither one of us were popping off. We both conducted ourselves appropriately, and in the end, we got rewarded a little bit for it. We still were there 3.5 hours, but anyway, uh, yeah, I think Michigan State tried to compete. I mean, I didn't see anybody hanging their heads and just, but yeah, you if you wanted to say, hey, they came out a little flat because USC was just beating them to the punch with those offensive rebounds, and they were just, and Michigan State maybe wasn't as good defensively. They weren't as sharp, especially early in the game. I think they got better once they settled in, but the start was just bad. Um, that's fair. And was the travel part of that? I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be interesting. The next one, you really shouldn't have that excuse because you've now got two other days where you're not playing a game in between. And so anything about time zone adjustment and all that, I personally don't think it's a big deal coming east, going to the West Coast. I don't think it's that difficult unless you're at a car rental place for 3.5 hours. Then it can be a challenge. But anyway, um, look, they lost. So if you want to chalk some of it up to that, I can't argue with it.
Yeah, it's recommendation not to travel day of the game. That's probably fortunately they traveled a couple days before to get themselves acclimated, so that would they lose that excuse. So the next key of the game was the foul line. This is one where Michigan State has, has a strength almost every single game. Certain one in free throw percentage because they're one of the top free throw shooting teams in the country, and second, their ability to get there, averaging about 23, 24 trips a game, I think. Still, they end up going 11 for 19. So the 19 is not terrible. It's you hope it a little bit more, and you're not going to get the whistle on the road. Maybe I certainly thought they suffered a little bit there, but to shoot 58% from the line. And these are not just like all Shimon Sapala shooting free throws. This is like, you've got Jeremy Fears missing, you've got everybody missing free throws. And so that was a struggle. USC got, of course, was 15 for 19 at shooting 79%. They were 100% for a while. They missed a bunch late. And some of them, they wouldn't even matter. I think Desmond missed a few late, which, they're already up 7 points or something. So they're kind of inconsequential. So that was a reflection, I think, largely of Michigan State just not really attacking, especially early in the game. They just they weren't drawing any fouls.
Yeah, it was. Look, in any game, you can't just point to one thing, but I definitely think the one that stuck out as perhaps the most significant to me in the end in a 6 point loss was the performance at the foul line. 19 is not great, not a disaster on the road. They were, it's a funny game. They were even with USC in free throw attempts. Each of them had 19. So And we've been talking about the insanity of Brad Underwood lately with his complaining that he's just obsessed with the way games are called. And frequently, they're games where his team got just as many free throw attempts on the road as the host team did. So, like, you don't have room to complain, my man. But uh, that was the case here. But I will, and Eric can now attest to this. I know that I try to in when we do these post games, and usually if I'm posting about games, something I don't tend to harp on the officiating very much. I try to take, within reason, and there's certainly times where you have to call a spade, but try to keep an even keel with that stuff because ultimately in any game, and I would say it's true of this game too, despite what I'm about to say, um, it's always about more than that. It's rare that you can say we had that game won but for the officials. Like there's usually you did some things to contribute to a loss, and Michigan State absolutely did them here. That said, I was in game absolutely infuriated by the way that game was being called because I thought USC um, was really getting away with a lot of defensive contact, especially at the rim, which, in my mind, Michigan State has established a pattern, a track record with this team. Hey, they play downhill, they attack, and they get fouls called because they're drawing contact. They're forcing defenses to have to foul them. And I thought there were a lot of those that were left on the floor. That said, and this is where we get back to the you did a lot yourself to lose the game. 11 for 19, not going to cut it. And not just this team, any team trying to win a Big Ten road game against anybody. 11 for 19 is a disaster. And like you said, guys like Cohen Carr, who's been just tremendous, he was 1 for 4 in this game. That's just, you can't have it. You know, Jace Richardson missed one. Can't have it. So that was a big blow. And USC, USC gets to the line not quite as well as Michigan State, but pretty close. I think they were in the mid 50s and MSU was in the 40s coming into the game. But Eric Musselman's been crying about it recently. It's not good enough. He said he was, my teams have been in the top 30 in foul rate 11 of the last 12 years, and it wasn't enough. I don't know if he was crying after this one. He shouldn't be because he got a good whistle. But he was at home. You expect that he's going to get a good whistle. So again, it's not a complaint, more just an observation. I thought Michigan State got absolutely jobbed.
All right. So the third key to the game is transition. This is where we thought Michigan State could get some work done as well against a fairly undisciplined USC defense. They end up with 9 fast break points, which is hardly any. They're averaging about 20 a game or 15 to 20, I think, and USC with 4. So there's a slight edge, but boy, not much. And I felt like even when and then not really related to transition, but just even to tempo, but I just felt like they didn't play with much tempo even in the half court, but that's sort of unrelated.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. I think they got thrown out of whack by USC. I mentioned that shifting what they were doing defensively, and then no matter which defense they were in, they did a very good job of penetration denial. Michigan State was having a hard time. The guards were having a hard time getting the ball in the lane. And when they did, they were usually met with enough resistance that there wasn't an easy opportunity there the way they're used to seeing. Um, so yeah, all of that was really disappointing. And I think the effect of it is you're right. They did not play with enough urgency in the half court. Case in point, a possession they had gotten it down to 5, and then they'd managed to get a miss and a defensive rebound, thank God. So you're going down court, right around, I think the possession started just over a minute to play. And they're down 5. No, it was a little more than that because I remember turning to you. I think there was a timeout afterward and saying, well, at least they're in a position they don't have to foul. If they get stops, if they score here, that takes it down to 3 or 2, one possession game. And if they get one stop, they're guaranteed to have another possession. They don't have to foul. And that was a big deal because USC was in the double bonus. So that it wasn't like there was a one-on-one situation available to you anymore. They were going to shoot 2. And they've been hitting them. And then Michigan State comes down and just runs a terrible possession that ends up in a shot clock violation. A shot clock violation on a possession where urgency is of the utmost concern anyway. And your senior, and look, Jaden Aiken's done a lot of good things. I think he's had a very good year. I've been very happy with the way he's played overall. You haven't heard us be incredibly critical of him. That play, man, your senior's got to be better than that. He was totally unaware of the clock. You just can't have it. I mean, if he's in a situation where he's got to throw up a prayer, okay, then we can talk about how the possession itself stunk. But at least he would have shown the awareness. He didn't show the awareness, and you just can't have that. So hopefully that's a learning moment. In general, just real quick, you talked about discipline, and I will freely admit I had serious expectations that USC would be undisciplined in terms of transition defense and would have a really hard time containing Michigan State. But Michigan State struggled to get clean defensive rebounds. That was part of it. And then even when they were, I thought USC was really good in terms of floor balance. Like were not a lot of opportunities. There was a segment or two of the game where maybe two or three possessions in a row, you'd see Michigan State get out and run, and it felt like, okay, maybe the tide's turning, they're starting to get out, and then it would just disappear again. So tough day. Give USC some credit for it, and like Izzo says, give Michigan State some blame.
So the fourth key of the game was getting the paint. This is one where we expected Michigan State to get a lot done because, of course, USC doesn't have a lot of shot blocking. Both teams got 34 points in the paint, so you could say Michigan State got some done there, but I mean, out of definitely a lot more opportunities. And I think, outside of Cone Carr, no one was really attacking too much. I felt like the other guards sort of attacked partway, and then they would just sort of turn around and not try and finish, which is a little surprising, especially I think with Jace. He seems like someone who, well, once he starts going in there, he doesn't usually back out, and he backed out a number of times too. I think we're used to seeing Jaden Akins back out. We're used to seeing Jeremy Fears back out sometimes, but not Jace. And even he would turn back too. And I don't know. It's just it's a little disappointing that way.
Look, the bottom line is Michigan State was 19 for 42 on twos, so sub 50%. Not going to get it done, period. That's just not who they are. Now, again, I go back to what we were talking about after the game, that maybe that number could have been improved if they had decided to try to exploit the size advantage that they had in this game. But I think those first two possessions where they tried to go inside, which we all know, anybody watched Michigan State know that's frequently the first possession of the game, and sometimes first two are scripted. Get the ball inside. That's what Izzo wants to do, and often it is a tone setter. It wasn't today. There were two bad possessions that ended in turnovers, and they just never really got back on track with it. I think especially in a game like this where you had to, you know, you can know what you expect to happen coming into a game, and then at a certain point you see what actually is happening, and you had to be able to recognize, and I'm sure the coaching staff did, hey, we're, for whatever reason, they're doing a great job guarding our guards, and we're not getting into the paint with, and even when we are, we're being turned back, as you said. So what else can we do? Because we gotta have twos. We have to. And that's where I maybe would have liked to have seen. But again, there were other problems going on. USC went small for most of that game. So you had to be concerned a bit about defensive matchups. Maybe that discouraged MSU from going as big as they would have liked to. I don't know if that was the thought process. Wouldn't surprise me if it was. And then that led to rebounding problems and on and on and on. It was just, it's not that I think, oh, USC is a bad matchup for Michigan State. On this day, it just didn't work out. But, getting back to the point here, if Michigan State is going to go 19 for 42 from two, this team is probably going to have a hard time winning a game like that. They are, because they've given us no reason to think that they're likely to have a bust out 3-point game. And they were okay today. They're 5 for 15. It's about what they've been in Big Ten play. It's about on par, but that's it. You're not getting a lot of attempts. You're not getting a lot of makes. It all comes down to what they do in the paint, really, in the lane. And today it just wasn't good enough.
Yeah, I wonder in some ways, when USC went small, I wonder if they would, when they had more size than USC, if they had tried to go back inside, they just got right. I mean, I think that would have been potentially very helpful. Yeah, right, exactly. All right, so fifth final key of the game is giveaways. These teams were pretty even there, 13 to 11. Michigan State had two couple more turnovers. I thought the Michigan State turnovers, well, a number of them, they had like three probably offensive blocks, legal blocks, four legal offensive blocks. And then, just I think the points off turnovers were pretty even for the between the two teams. There's not a whole lot of difference there, but boy, well, it's one of those things you get, you're missing edges in the paint, you're missing edges in free throws. You get where do you make it up? And they did make it up here at turnovers.
That's it. It wasn't a total disaster, but it wasn't good. And this wasn't a particularly fast-paced game. So 13 turnovers, was not insignificant given the pace at which the game was played. But yeah, that's it. You can say, well, it wasn't what lost you the game, but on a day where these other things aren't going well, um, it was not helpful at the very least. We'll say that. The one guy I think gets credit for this, and I do want to call it out. Not that he was perfect, but um, Jeremy Fears, I thought, did some good things in this game. Now, he struggled early guarding Claude, but I do think you have to give him some credit, along with Akins and some other guys occasionally on switches, but those two guys primarily, with the way they guarded him in the second half. And then you look, Jeremy had 12 points. He had 6 assists, no turnovers, so he was not the problem in the mistake category today. It was other guys. And, you know, Michigan State Michigan State I thought tried to force some stuff. It was the kind of thing that you see from a team that's not used to being down very much, that's down and starts pressing. And that was true even in the early stages of the game. I mean, I think they just kind of got shell shocked. You're looking up and Jesus, we're down 22-7. And we haven't even hit I don't even think they'd gotten to the under 12 timeout, and USC had 22 points on the board. And so you start pressing, you start trying to do things that are maybe a little bit out of character, a little bit beyond what you're capable of or what the smart play, percentage play is, and you end up with those problems. And in a game where you're doing so many other things in a subpar fashion, those mistakes end up hurting. So, yeah, it was not the biggest evil by any means, but it didn't help.
So then if we want to look at tying everything back together, this is their first loss in the Big Ten. They're now 9-1. So, it's one of those things like obviously you would rather be 10-0, but if you asked us 10 games ago, how would you feel about, 9-1 in the league going at the turn? You're like, oh, you take it in second, right? You hate doing that because then, of course, now you've got a 1-game losing streak. You got another tough, what we think the tougher of the 2 games out here in Southern California where they have to go to UCLA. And then you have, well, frankly, you have Michigan and Purdue sort of on your tail. They each have just 2 losses. They're only half game or 1 game back, just depending on which team you look at. So it's a race. We knew it would be. We knew no one's going to just lap the field in the Big Ten this year. I think it's nice that Michigan State's at this position, but they got to win another game with a tough one coming up. So where do you think this goes? I mean, I feel like in some respects with this game, I think Michigan State. It was sort of coming in the sense that there have been a lot of like little leaky holes in their game that they've not played very complete games where but they've done just enough other things to just kind of get over the top and manage. And this game they didn't. It's probably a good experience game from the sense that, like you said, they forced some pressure. They had to come from behind. They hopefully learned some things, and that's going to be helpful to them later on this season when inevitably you're going to have another lousy start or something like that. And so, will this be something that helps them, or is this going to be something that's going to, hurt their confidence, et cetera? Because I do think, and I know Graham Couchman this with Jaden Akins, he has been pressing a little bit. He looks like he's struggling a little bit with the shot. He was 1 for 5, I think, from 3 today. Obviously, for Michigan State to get where they want to go, they need him to be a little bit better offensively.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, but I also don't know if I believe that. Look, I guess this is the way I would think about it. A a really good Jaden Akins makes things easier, and you have a greater margin for error for sure. I don't know if I believe that I've never believed that it was necessary for him to emerge as the alpha for this to be a good team. It doesn't. It's not that important. Um, but you look at a day like today and you say, boy, would have been nice to have that guy. And yeah. Um, I think, look, with regard to the Big Ten race, everybody's flawed in this league. I mean, we just on the flight, we watched Purdue and Indiana. I mean, Purdue should have lost that game. They were not good. They got bailed out really by they got Mike Woodson. and and Michigan's guy. I know they won today, but it was apparently not a very impressive showing at Rutgers, and you know that's a very flawed team too. And then everybody else has got 4 or 5 losses or more. So you're still in really good position if you're Michigan State. Now that said, you know you can't let one become two, become three. And we all know, because Lord knows it gets harped on enough, that this is the point where the schedule starts turning up a little bit. At least that's the perception. So, does that mean that Tuesday night um, is an important game? Sure, because UCLA is still theoretically in it. They've got 4 losses. They're 7-4 now. Uh, but I think if you're Michigan State, I think the bigger thing, and this is what I felt about this game too. If Michigan State had played well and it was just one of those things, like you ran into a buzzsaw on the road, which can happen. Okay. But we still played pretty well. They didn't play well. So you come away from this with that as the foremost thought, I think. It's not about the result as much as it is how did they play? What is that telling you about where they are right now? And what it says is they've got some work to do to get back on track. Um, I think you're right that a lot of the games lately have been flawed performances in one way or another. But that said, there is a formula for how this Michigan State team wins games. And in most of those games, they've hit a lot of the formula, you know? Like there've been okay, you get a game recently where you keep turnovers down. You do a great job generating twos and hitting them. You get to the foul line and you're hitting those. You're in transition, but you're struggling with defensive rebounding. Okay, that's a flaw, but you're still checking a lot of boxes. And you say, okay, that happens. So I don't think it's been, I guess the only reason I'm pushing back a little against that is I don't personally believe that this has been a case where Michigan State has been winning kind of despite itself, that they've just been getting by. I don't think that. They've been hammering most of these teams. These have not been competitive games, but there haven't been any really, other than Illinois. Illinois was the one where you say, okay, this is down to the last possession or two. Like I know Penn State was a 5-point spread. That wasn't a oh my God kind of game. No, they haven't had those. So that's to their credit. That means you're doing, I don't care who you're playing Big Ten teams still. That means something. So all of that, I think, is a positive. Today, it was not a positive. We just walked through all the things that they typically do well, the elements of that formula that were not check marked. And that's what happens when they don't do that. They don't have that great individual player who can just say, screw it, I'm winning this game. They don't have that. So the formula is they've got, and how they get to that point in any given game varies depending upon matchups and who's on for Michigan State. We see that every game, it's different. They don't have that one guy that can change an outcome like that. They don't have an Ace Bailey. They don't have the greatest point guard anybody's ever seen in the Big Ten, Yakachonis, right? I mean, he's something. I mean, Magic Johnson, step aside. Isaiah Thomas, forget about it. Anyway, um, they don't have that guy. So they got to get those box check marked. And when they don't, you see what happens today. You get another opportunity to check a lot of those boxes against UCLA. Look, UCLA is a good team. They're a deeper team than most of the teams Michigan State sees. And they've been playing very well lately. That's a game Michigan State can win. 100%. That's a game Michigan State can win. They just got to play better than they did today. That's what it's going to take. I don't even really, maybe they run into a UCLA buzzsaw, but I don't think so. I've seen enough of UCLA. They're a good team. They're not a great team. So to me, it's really about, okay, we got to start crashing the defensive boards, limiting teams again. We got to be a little more locked in and together from the tip defensively. We got to make sure that we're getting into the lane. We can't be turning the ball over too much, and we got to run. All the things we've talked about all year long that have been strengths. You do those things, everything else is going to take care of itself. That's my view. So I still feel very good about where this team sits. And then again, we're talking about this as if this was just a catastrophic performance. They lost by 6 against a team that's decent, not great, but I'm not going to lie, but decent at home after a long trip. Uh, that's not like, and I haven't really looked too much at the fan reaction day, but it's not a sign of an impending apocalypse in my view. And I understand it was a game USC led wire to wire. That's not good, but it also never got, other than a brief period where they got it up to 15 in the first half and then MSU came right back. It was always there. It always felt like they're one sustained 2 minute push away from winning this thing. And then they just couldn't do that. So that's your bad day. It's not that bad.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. And I think just the only thing I'd add is I think the fact that they don't have that Ace Bailey, that superstar player who's a guaranteed, top 10 NBA draft pick, leaves people the perception that this team is extra vulnerable. Like they're not quite as good. Right. Well, I agree that I think it's untrue, but you're used to just seeing that great player like, a Cassius Winston where you're like, okay, we got no matter if things aren't working, we've got this guy we can always fall back on. And so I think it changes the perception of the team in the sense that you don't think they're quite as resilient, maybe.
But we just one response to that, okay? And I mentioned this near the outset. If you want to say that about today's game, that the difference was in the end, Michigan State did not have a guy who could just put them on his back and will them to a victory. Fair enough, they didn't have that, and it didn't happen. But I've got a ton of evidence suggesting that they don't need that to win games. They're a very unusually constructed team. That's and it wasn't by intent. This is just how it's evolved. And so most every other day, he said, well, somebody's going to figure it out because they have. Today it didn't happen. So if one wants to say, and I'm not saying you're just mentioning it as a criticism that's out there, say, well, they're vulnerable because when they get in a spot like this, they don't have that guy. Okay. My response to that is, how often are they in that situation? And why are they not in that situation very often? In fact, I would say, because if you look at the Kansas game and the Memphis game, I don't know that either of those felt like this kind of situation where it's like, boy, they just really needed a guy to carry them. That wasn't what happened there. This is really the first time. If you think that's a sign of impending doom to come, okay, maybe. I guess we'll see. I'm not particularly worried about that at this stage.
All right, so I guess we'll leave it there. Again, we're going to be back for the UCLA game. We're going to have Dom. Bracket Dom is coming back. He's top 3 now, I think. Maybe he's third or second in the country as far as bracket prediction. So he's back on the horse. He's going to give us his thoughts on comes to seeding. Where before we were always asking him, I wonder if Michigan State's going to make the tournament, or how they going to, what kind of seed line around the 10 line are they going to be in this year? It's going to be more like two through 4, and chances for 1, although might be a little tough with the competition out there this year. But anyway, we'll be back with that, and then of course the UCLA preview, and we'll head on over to Poly Pavilion and check things out pretty soon. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.